Hi everyone. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to our first webinar, which is based off the research team's recent publication on the impact of food insecurity on child development. So we're so excited to be hosting this webinar. I'm Pahal Vyas, the lead of the research committee for the Hunger at Home Youth Council.
My name is Avni Gupta, and I'm the secretary on the executive team.
My name is Shravya Nadagoda, and I am the participants committee lead.
So let's jump right in. So starting with a quick introduction, what is food insecurity? So food insecurity means not having a reliable access to enough nutritious food for a healthy or active life. It can be temporary, such as missing a few meals, or chronic, where food shortages happen repeatedly over months or years. The problem is not limited to only low-income countries, but rather affects families from different regions and different income levels. Today, we will be discussing the three types of impacts that food insecurity can leave on child development: molecular, cognitive, and emotional.
Okay, hi everyone. In this section, I'll be focusing on what's happening biologically, specifically the molecular changes that affect how our brain actually forms. I'll be covering three key nutrients that are commonly disrupted by food insecurity and how these deficiencies alter our brain structure and long-term function. But first, here's some context. So, our early life, from fetal development through our toddler years, is our brain's fastest growing period. Billions of synapses, or the tiny connections between neurons that allow them to talk to each other, form. And what also forms are a circuit for memory and learning. Because this growth is so rapid, the brain depends heavily on a consistent supply of nutrients. When food insecurity disrupts that supply, the brain has to adjust its development in ways that become permanent. That's why it's important to understand the biology behind these changes rather than just viewing food insecurity as a social issue. So, the first deficiency I'm going to cover is iron deficiency. We often associate iron with our blood, but it's just as important in the mitochondria, which are inside our cells and make energy. So, iron is found in cytochrome C oxidase, which is one of the main enzymes that makes ATP, or the cell's energy currency. When iron is low, this enzyme doesn't form correctly, and the hippocampus, or the part of our brain that handles memory and learning, is really sensitive to that loss. Lower ATP also means that our neurons in our brains don't have the energy they need to build synapses or form memories. Iron deficiency also changes the expression of our genes related to neuron growth and metabolism. What's important here is that even when our iron is added back later on, structural changes can't be fully undone because they happen during a critical stage of our brain development. So, the next one I'm going to be talking about is protein malnutrition. Protein plays two main roles in brain development. First, it supplies the amino acids needed to build neurotransmitters, which are the chemical neurons that we use to send signals. Without enough protein, our levels of serotonin, dopamine, and GABA fall. These are major regulators of mood, motivation, focus, and our response to stress. If these are disrupted, our emotional regulation and cognitive performance is also disrupted. Second, protein is needed to build the physical structures of our brain, or the dendrites, which are the branches in our brain that receive signals, our synapses, and myelin. When protein is limited, our brain becomes smaller because the dendrites, or the branches, sever, and we have fewer branches left for communication, and thus slower signaling. These issues contribute to long-term difficulties with learning and behavior. And again, timing matters. If this happens during our early childhood, our brain cannot catch up later and learn what we missed. The last one I'm going to be talking about is zinc deficiency. Zinc acts almost like a fine-tuning regulator in our brain. It gets released during neuronal firing. That's when a neuron sends an electrical signal, and zinc also adjusts how strongly signals are transmitted, which is key for controlling our learning and memory. Zinc also protects our brain cells from oxidative stress, meaning it shields them from damage caused by any harmful molecules, and it supports neurogenesis, which is the birth of new neurons to form new memories. When zinc is low, especially during early childhood, the birth of new neurons is slowed, and apoptosis, or the death of our cells, increases. This reduces the number of functional brain cells we have in areas like the hippocampus, which is again very crucial for our memory. On a molecular level, zinc deficiency also weakens something called ERK1 signaling, which is a growth pathway that our brain cells use to develop, branch, and mature. These changes contribute to cognitive slowing and emotional symptoms that often mirror depression or irritability. So, across the three things I covered iron, protein, and zinc the pattern is quite consistent. These nutrients support the energy supply, structure, and communication systems of our brain. When they're missing during our early development, neurons form differently, circuits are weaker, and our cognitive skills are affected long term.
Okay, so now let's discuss the cognitive impact of food insecurity. To start off with, let's begin at looking at why nutrition matters so much for cognitive development in the first place. Well, as Avni said earlier, childhood is the fastest period of brain growth, specifically billions of neural connections forming every single day. And this growth depends heavily on consistent access to key nutrients like iron, iodine, zinc, protein, and omega-3 fatty acids. When a child doesn't get enough of these building blocks, the effects show up directly in how the brain works. We see difficulties with memory, attention, language development, emotional regulation, and overall school readiness. Food insecurity affects children in two major ways. Biologically, it means they're simply missing the nutrients needed for a healthy brain and nervous system development. However, it's also environmental. Food insecure households often face chronic stress, such as uncertainty about the next meal, family conflict, or unstable routines. The stress creates a chaotic learning environment for the child, which further disrupts the brain's ability to develop normally. So now we're going to start by looking at a global meta review. So, what's important to understand is that food insecurity isn't just a problem in one region or one income group. This meta review shows the same pattern across countries and economic levels, as children experiencing food shortages score consistently lower on cognitive measures. The most affected areas are memory, attention, language skills, and basic school readiness, which are skills that form the foundation for later learning. Micronutrient deficiencies, such as iron, zinc, and iodine, don't just cause kids to feel tired or distracted, but rather lead to structural functional changes in the brain. For example, low iron can reduce myelination, which slows down how quickly neurons communicate. And beyond the nutrition itself, household stress plays a major role. When families are worried about not having enough food, children also absorb that stress, and the resulting pressure is unstable and worsens cognitive outcomes even further. So now let's look into two specific case studies. First, starting with a longitudinal study in Ecuador. So researchers followed children over many years and found that early childhood stunting and malnutrition were strong predictors of later math and language difficulties. What's especially concerning is that these delays don't often appear right away, and many children show signs of clear cognitive difficulty once they start school, meaning the effects of early malnutrition stay hidden until learning becomes more demanding. The study also showed that these challenges rarely occur in isolation. Poverty, limited caretaker education, and fewer learning resources in the home amplify the effect. And once these early cognitive deficits appear, they can become increasingly difficult to reverse in the future. Next, let's talk about a long term study in Guatemala. So, this case study basically shows that children who are undernourished earlier in life had lower IQ levels, completed fewer years of schooling, and earned lower incomes, even decades later. The main cause was limited diet diversity, very low protein intake, or too few fruits or micronutrient rich foods, and restricted access to supplements or medical care. For rural families, food scarcity, and limited healthcare intensify the problem. The study shows that food insecurity doesn't just affect learning in childhood, but it shapes a person's intellectual, educational, and economic trajectory for the rest of their life. Now, now let's discuss how food insecurity specifically connects to the actual brain structures. Different regions of the brain develop at different times, and inadequate nutrition disrupts each one in specific ways. First, starting with the hippocampus, which is essential for learning, and memory. Nutrient shortages, especially in omega-3s, iron, and zinc, can reduce hippocampal volume. That means that the food insecure children may have smaller or less functional memory centers. Next is the prefrontal cortex, which governs attention planning, decision making, and impulse control. And when nutrition is inadequate during early development, this region develops structural and functional deficits. And as a result, children may struggle with executive function, things like staying focused in class or organizing their behavior. The amygdala, which is involved in emotional processing, also becomes more reactive when in conditions of chronic stress. And food insecure households often experience higher levels of stress, which heightens emotional sensitivity and can contribute to anxiety and behavioral challenges. Finally, the HPA axis, which is the system that regulates our stress response. This is impacted by food insecurity because it's associated with elevated cortisol levels. Chronic high cortisol weakens memories, emotional regulation, and learning, especially in young children. So, malnutrition and stress don't just influence behavior, but they reshape the developing brain in measurable ways. So, what's the common thread? Well, when we look at all the research from global patterns to individual case studies, there is a clear thread. Early childhood is the most vulnerable period. From 0 to 2 years, the brain grows faster than any other time. It is the highest demand for nutrients, and even small deficiencies can lead to long lasting consequences. From ages 3 to 5, we start to see these cognitive delays, especially in attention, language, and memory. The challenges become more visible, especially when children enter school. By ages 6 and up, these gaps turn into clear academic differences, and unfortunately, they can become much harder to reverse at this stage. And as the Guatemala study shows, these impacts don't just end in childhood, but they ripple into adolescence and adulthood, affecting IQ, years of schooling, and lifetime income. This timeline underscores a crucial point. Early nutrition is not just about physical health, but it shapes cognitive, emotional, and academic outcomes for decades. Small improvements in nutrition during early childhood can create huge long term benefits. So, now let's go over to the psychological development.
Hello everyone, I will be covering the psychological development research. So the first slide, we will be covering the emotional and psychological impact. Food insecurity is far more than an absence of food. It creates a profound emotional and psychological burden that shapes a child's sense of safety and belonging. When parents are worried about groceries, rent, or how to stretch meals, children absorb that tension instantly. Even when adults try to shield them from stress, children instinctively grasp fear, arguments, and instability. From 2018 through 2025, research reveals a striking pattern. Children in food insecure households frequently internalize adult stress, assuming emotional responsibilities far beyond what is developmentally appropriate. This emotional overload leads to heightened anxiety, depression, irritability, sleep disturbances, and emotional withdrawal. These pressures spill into everyday functioning, increased behavioral problems, trouble regulating emotions, and noticeable academic decline. In fact, some studies portray an alarming rise in mental health related medical visits among food insecure youth, a 55% increase in outpatient visits, and a 74% increase in urgent mental health care. Ultimately, the daily uncertainty around food disrupts a child's emotional stability. Hunger doesn't just impact the body, it reshapes a child's emotional world. Next, we will be covering the slide of cognitive and physical development challenges. When children are deprived of essential nutrients, the consequences are illustrated in both cognitive performance and physical development. Proper nutrients fuel the brain's ability to form connections, store information, and maintain focus and adapt to new learning. Without these nutrients, children struggle with concentration, memory, and academic endurance. Teachers frequently report that hungry students arrive lethargic, dizzy, or puzzled. Hunger becomes an invisible barrier that undermines learning long before the first lesson is introduced. Physically, chronic undernutrition impairs the immune system, slows motor development, and drains energy. Children experiencing food insecurity may miss out on extracurricular activities, which are crucial for developing physical coordination, creativity, and social skills. Some youth even resort to risky coping behaviors to compensate for hunger, including excessive water intake or misusing unprescribed medications. These behaviors can impair brain development and place children at significant medical risk. So the impact is not just temporary discomfort. It results in long-term cognitive delays, weakened physical development, and diminished educational opportunity. Next, we will be covering the slide on long-term physical psychological effects. The psychological consequences of food insecurity do not disappear once childhood ends. They often persist into adulthood with lifelong effects. Studies show strong associations between chronic food insecurity in youth and higher rates of PTSD, chronic anxiety, depression, disordered eating, and increased vulnerability to serious mental health conditions. Food insecurity is considered an adverse childhood experience, or ACE. ACEs expose children to continuous stress during periods of rapid brain development. When children grow up in homes where food is unpredictable, their stress response becomes heightened and overactive. This creates long-term difficulties with emotional regulation, trust, and interpersonal relationships. As adults, individuals who faced food insecurity often describe persistent fears around financial instability, food access, or their ability to provide for a future family. Many struggle with self esteem, leadership confidence, and independence because they grow up in survival mode. In other words, food insecurity is not a short term hardship. It can fundamentally shape the emotional and psychological architecture of adulthood. Next, we will be covering the slide of socioeconomic and health impacts. Food insecurity affects far more than the present moment. It carries long-term consequences for health, education, and socioeconomic mobility. Children who grow up with inconsistent nutrition face heightened risk for chronic diseases, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and weakened immune functioning. These health burdens follow them into adulthood and reduce life expectancy. Academically, hunger undermines focus, motivation, attendance, and self-confidence. Over time, these learning gaps lead to reduced educational attainment and fewer career opportunities, reinforcing cycles of poverty. Socially, children experiencing hunger may withdraw, isolate themselves, or struggle to participate in group activities due to exhaustion, embarrassment, or emotional stress. These disruptions interfere with communication skills, teamwork, and social development. New Jersey data from 2018 to 2022 emphasized that food insecurity reflects broader inequities. It is not merely an individual challenge, it is a structural issue affecting community health, educational outcomes, and long-term economic stability. Finally, we will cover the solutions and call to action. Consistent nutrition is the foundation. Stable, reliable meals reduce stress, improve focus, and support healthy physical and cognitive development. But food alone isn't enough. Emotional and social support through counseling, mentorship, and peer programs assist children in coping with the stress and trauma that often accompany food insecurity. Early intervention is also critical. Identifying at-risk children before issue escalating can prevent long-term mental health challenges. Encouraging growth opportunities, such as access to extracurricular activities, provides children a safe space to develop cognitive and social skills, builds confidence, and finds joy beyond daily struggles. Finally, comprehensive, cohesive community engagement and policy measures play a critical role in shaping our future. Programs that address food insecurity on a systematic level not only improve mental health, but also bolster academic performance and future opportunities. Together, these approaches create a comprehensive support network, assisting children to thrive despite the challenges of food insecurity. Recent data shows that more than 260,000 children statewide face food insecurity, many of them right here in our own neighborhoods. Early childhood food insecurity is far more than hunger. It affects a child's brain, cognition, and emotional health. At the molecular level, deficiencies in iron, protein, and zinc hinder brain function, slowing learning, memory, and neural development. These nutrient gaps are particularly harmful during early development when the brain is forming critical connections. Cognitive effects are clear. Children experiencing chronic food insecurity often sh- illustrate memory, attention, language, and executive functions deficits. Stress from unstable food environments, including family attention and constrained caregiving, further alters brain development, creating a cycle where diet and stress together limit learning and academic performance. Emotionally, food insecurity can push children to take on adult responsibilities, increase anxiety and depression, and raise the risk on long-term mental illness such as PTSD or schizophrenia. These psychological effects, combined with cognitive deficits, impair social, educational, and molecular and physical growth, highlighting how interconnected nutrient, cognition, and emotional health truly are.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about Hunger at Home and also our youth council. So, Hunger at Home's main goal is to fight food insecurity in Silicon Valley. What we do is we rescue surplus food from local restaurants, hotels, businesses, and we take this food and turn it into meals, fresh meals for families, unhoused individuals, and vulnerable communities. We have weekly food distributions and targeted delivery programs. The youth council, what we do is we work with Hunger at Home to support the food rescue and work on community outreach. We help organize events, volunteer drives, and awareness projects. And within the committee, we have subcommittees for research, communications, and participants. So currently, the Youth Council is working on two major events that are going to be next year in January. So one of them is our research symposium. We're inviting anyone in middle school or high school to come present research posters or research slides and show their either be it maybe on biology, food, public health, and we're going to have judges come and give them feedback on their presentations and research. We also invite anyone to just show up and talk to these kids about what they do. We're also organizing our second Food for Thought Summit. This is where students can come work on case studies and present their solutions that they make on the spot to industry judges. It's a great way to make connections, learn more about policy and how we can use policy to fight food insecurity, and just improve your speaking skills overall. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, so there's a question in the chat about whether or not there's currently any policies that address these impacts for food insecure households. And there actually are a number of policies, especially through school nutrition. So, like for example, the California's, I think, Universal Meals Program offers free breakfast and lunch to all students in public and charter schools. And so this allows students to get like an adequate amount of nutrition when they attend school. And also at like a federal level, the community eligibility provision allows like students with high poverty rates to feed all students for free. So allows schools with high poverty rates to feed all students for free. So that's even if individual families don't apply.
I can answer the question. The question is, do we know whether these effects of early food insecurity are reversible if nutritious foods are provided later on in childhood? So, food insecurity is only reversible to an extent. If it's quite severe, as I mentioned, the damages to our brain and also our metabolic system is permanent and can't be changed. Some research shows that when children who experience early undernutrition receive targeted nutritional interventions later on, such as like iron supplements or vitamin supplements, there can be significant improvements. However, the timing, as I mentioned earlier, matters a lot. Deficits that develop very early on may be harder to completely reverse due to critical brain development. I also see a question, are there any policies around food wastage? I can talk about one that the Youth Council specifically researched. A lot of food waste is due to people reading the labeling on packaging wrong. It may say best buy or sell by or use by, and this wording can often be very confusing. There was a bill that we researched called ABB 660, which aimed to standardize the labeling so that every packaging said the same thing. So there would be a lot less confusion on when to use food, and this food would not be thrown out or wasted. So that's one policy. There's a lot that California is currently supporting.
And very significant for that is the SB 1383, which is demanding a 20% organic waste reduction, or fines will be placed. California is the first to initiate that. And that's very prominent and something that Hunger at Home is very effective. We're currently doing Santana Row, San Pedro Square, all the major hotels, amphitheaters, and venues, and recovering food that would otherwise go to the landfill.
And then for the question on whether there are any like issues that need to be dealt with and are not given attention. So there are a few that I can think of, like especially starting with the fact that like currently many programs focus a lot on calories, but like they less on nutritional quality, especially like when you're out in the store and like buying something, it's like a lot of people don't look at the specific nutrients. And like we mentioned in the slideshow, like missing nutrients like iron, zinc, or protein, these are the ones that often have lasting effects on childhood development. And so that's like a really major thing that we should educate the public to look for. And then also early childhood is also like the most vital window, but oftentimes like interventions begin to happen too late, and this often like prevents delays in learning and memory. So it's important to keep these things in mind.
Add on to Bahal's statement, we also acknowledge that income inequality is also not entirely addressed when it's a really large economic issue. And without addressing wages, affordability, and social safety nets, the problem continues to persist. And we also notice that people often lack access to nutrition and healthy food, and this leads to hidden hunger, micronutrient deficiencies, and long-term health problems. And without and a lot of food is wasted in homes, restaurants, and supermarkets, and solutions from here get far less attention than agricultural solutions.
I can answer the question of how does Hunger at Home support kids who are food insecure? We have a lot of different things that we do. One of them is we partner with the SJSU Spartan Pantry, and we provide food resources for students and families who might struggle to afford groceries.
Why my volume is
We also partner with nonprofit organizations to deliver meals and see that the children in high need communities can get access to proper, prepared, and fresh nutritional food. Um, we have different events such as a toy drive that is currently ongoing. We have the Food for Thought conference to raise awareness, and also the research symposium to raise awareness on the issue to show that because we want to build a sense of community and reduce stress that families may face when they see that their community cares about them and they have things that they can fall back on.
To add on to this question as well, there was recently the Bridge the Gap Gala, and Hunger Homes Youth Council were able to have some volunteers come and assist with preparation for this event. And there's also many food pantries, advocacy engagement, and also food distribution events to families where many people in the community can actively volunteer.
Any final questions or comments? I'd just like to add that if you're curious about learning more about the Youth Council or Hunger at Home as a whole, you can go to our website, hungerathome.org. And if you want to learn more about the Youth Council, if you look through the Hunger at Home's initiatives on their website, there is a link to the Youth Council page. The Youth Council also has an Instagram, which is linked under our website. So please check it out and support our upcoming events.
His research paper is also published on the website if anyone would like to read that and explore more into it.
Yeah, and a big thanks to everyone who attended. Your support means a lot, and I'm glad that you are committed to learning about how we can fight food insecurity.
Great job. I think this was just very informative and well put together. Very proud of all of you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending, and we will see you at our next webinar or next event. Have a good evening.
Thank you.